Good evening and welcome back to Perspectives with me, Nirmala Arnaslam, your host on every Thursday at 8 p.m. Thank you for all your support for this new segment, and we hope to keep bringing you interactive and informative information where we can all share our perspectives. So don't forget to join in our conversation by asking questions and sharing your views with us on Perspectives through our live chat. And if you would like to share any comments or feedback, you can always email us at perspectives@rmplive.com.au. In conjunction with the 16 days of activism against gender based violence, which started on 25th November, last Thursday we discussed about family and domestic violence, where we cleared some misconceptions about domestic violence. Where usually people always have the misconception that domestic violence is only about physical abuse, but actually it is so much more. It is about sexual violence, mental and emotional abuse, psychological abuse, coercive control. It has a whole range of things which actually falls under domestic violence. And we learned that many of the perpetrators use things such as love bombing and gaslighting to intimidate their victims and put fear in them. So, as we all know, most people in intimate relationships, at some point or another, definitely there will be disagreements. But what's the difference is in a healthy relationships, they're able to communicate and converse and settle it on an equal level. But usually in a relationship where there's domestic violence, the dominant person in the relationship usually uses abuse or violence to control the other person and to put fear in them. What we hope came out as a result of last week's discussion is that those who found themselves in such situations found the courage to seek support and help. So don't put yourself in such a situation where you feel that you can't escape, because definitely there is hope out there, and always reach out to someone and seek support. It may seem difficult, but it definitely is not impossible. And what we want to share with you here today is to let you know that there is hope and there is life after abuse. We have with us here today a very courageous woman who has endured domestic violence not once, but twice throughout her life. And what is amazing is where this woman is at currently, where she is now in her life. She is so amazing. She inspires me. And I hope when she shares her story with you, you too will be inspired and know that there is definitely life after abuse. So I would like to introduce my guest for today. For reasons of safety and safety issues, we have blurred out her image. So, but she's gonna share her story with us. So welcome to Perspectives, and thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me.
So, before we go in depth into your story of what you endured with the domestic violence, many people find it difficult to share the story and very reluctant, either out of fear or they still feel intimidated, or maybe they're afraid of repercussions. So maybe you'd like to share with the viewers why you have come here today and are so willing to share your story.
Nirmala, thank you. It's very symbolical for me to be here today in Orange, because we're oranging the world,
Yes.
and halfway through the 16 days of activism. So I've had a bit of a journey in the last few months, and for a long time I have been keeping this story secret as much as possible. So it wasn't a public story. People in my inner circle were privy to it because they were witness to it. What I've realized is everyone has a story and everyone needs to tell their story. So that was I've had a big moment on a retreat recently where we were told, tell your story. And I was like, what are you talking about? What part of that do I censor? People are not ready for this. But we were placed in a situation where other people would listen to that and get to tell your story, reframe your story, relabel your story. So I was quite curious to hear other people's perspective on my experience, and the words that came up were very heartwarming, encouraging, inspiring. So I think that I wanted to give to people listening today something that I haven't had at the time. So I think a lot of people talk about the experience, but not a lot of people, in my experience, come up and talk about that whole circle and that whole journey. So hope is the message that I'm wanting to convey today, because a woman in that situation, all they have is hope, or all they need is hope.
Yeah. And we definitely always have to hang on to that, because if we lose hope, then it's very difficult to move forward.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And for someone to go through domestic violence, it's definitely a very difficult position to be in. But for you, you've gone through it twice. I can't even begin to imagine it. So maybe you can just briefly run us through like how it started with your first, experience with domestic violence.
Most definitely. I look back and I still feel like you, Nirmala. It still sort of blows me away at times, because I have had two long-term relationships with two different people. They presented very differently, but my experience of violence was very different as well. So I was not born here in Australia, and I was born in a culture where male privilege was an unspoken rule. Therefore, I didn't really feel odd, actually. I felt that, this is it, I'm all grown up now, and I'm dealing with my own issues and my own, issues in my marriage. So it's actually normalized.
So you thought that situation was normal?
Completely.
Yeah.
So I was young, and he had some traits such as confidence and, being out there and loud that I lacked for myself. So that I found that very attractive, and I wasn't really seeing the controlling part of it. So very quickly, I mean, you have the signs very early on as well.
So you noticed it quite early on.
I noticed things. And very early, sort of coming from a very tight family unit, I started doubting myself rather than doubting that person's intentions.
Okay.
And
so you
I
thought
think,
you were doing something wrong?
absolutely.
Okay.
And they do have patterns of projecting, so they won't take responsibility for their actions. So early on, I'm trying to figure out this whole relationship thing, and I'm thinking it's just a part of it. So mindful as well that around me, other people were experiencing the same thing. Again, that normalization of toxic relationships, really.
Yeah. So when you were experiencing it and you see others going through it, you thought, oh, this is just normal.
Correct.
It definitely doesn't fall under the definition of domestic abuse.
No one
Yeah.
talks about it. In his own words, he said to me, it's not abuse because you're not bleeding, which is quite
So-
extreme when you think about it.
Yeah.
But it was quite interesting because it was quite the more traditional sort of type of abuse that we hear of. So someone that's intimidating, I've been yelled at, I've been called all the names under the sun, I've been publicly humiliated, I've been dragged out of bed, early hours in the morning. But when you get to that point of realization, it's actually late because the abuse has occurred, and there hasn't once been a soul that's come up to me to say, this is not right, you need to be out of that relationship.
So you didn't have anyone to turn to at that point in time, or is it that no one sort of basically saw it as domestic violence?
I think a very special friend to me recently said to me, I'm so sorry I didn't have the words for you. I said to her, I didn't have the language for myself.
Yeah.
I think that I felt very lonely, but they felt very helpless as well. They were just hoping that it would go over. His mother said to me, oh, it's on you now, you can pray for him. So it's quite interesting because all of a sudden then I was vested with that responsibility of changing him in a way. It was very known. His abuse was out there.
So
in
people
the
knew
open.
about it.
Everyone knew about it.
But everyone
I've
was
cried
just
on
hoping.
many shoulders.
Oh gosh! So everyone's just hoping it would get better on its own.
Correct. I've had people from the older generation hold my hand and basically say to me, "Hold on tight." Look at me dead straight in the eye. Hold on tight. So these were the messages that were communicated to me, and I'd assume to any other women in my situation.
So would you say that's because of the cultural norms that was set there?
100%.
Which
Yeah.
is very different from here, I would say.
So,
Yeah.
and that's
So what was your
where,
turning point?
That's
Yeah.
exactly right. So, I left the country I was born to come to Australia, and I've later realised that it was an escape because I quickly realised that I didn't leave the country because everyone talks, raves on about where I was born,
Mhm.
but I left a culture. I left a toxic culture. I've outgrown it. I knew that there was no way that I'd be able to stand on my own feet. I knew that I would be shamed for being divorced or a single parent. So,
So there was a stigma attached to it. Yeah.
absolutely.
So divorce was not something common, and people would probably talk about it or discourage it from you to do it.
Definitely talk about it. And I have to say, you'll be shamed from the previous generations. You'll be shamed from women and men.
Oh, so that's a very tough position to be put
Correct.
in. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So,
So when you
then,
came over here, you found that you had more support.
interestingly, when I came over here, that's when I first realised that it was a situation of domestic violence. I started to read about it, understand it, and I was still so nervous because I think I was judging myself and putting shame on myself because I expected that from my culture.
So your realization that it was domestic violence was only when you got to Australia.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that was so empowering. And therefore I started, accessing counselling. I've done that regularly over the years. I think that you need to prioritise self-care. So I've received really good supports, and I've left, and my family, some of my family have moved here as well. So I had their support, and it was just magical. The freedom that I'd experienced was just beyond my imagination.
Probably a very good turning point and life changing.
That's
So would you
right.
say that you know, because back home is so different, so your friends and family would not have like an idea of how to help you? So
I would agree.
yeah, looking back now, what would your advice be, not necessarily to them, but generally to people out there? How should someone step forward and help a family member or friend?
I think it's to call it out. I think it's to call it out because everyone will talk about it. But there's this whole notion of do not get involved in a couple's story. You do not know what goes behind doors. Well, I think you know, because if it's bad in front of people, it's even worse behind doors.
Yeah.
So, look, I think it's fear. Mostly it's fear. And then people sort of, there's that shame that they put on themselves, and there's, the gossip that goes with it. So I think there's a lot of that, but I think is to be brave enough. And one anchor that I have for, I've spoken to a lot of women since, and one sort of anchor that I have that I use for myself is always, what would you do if that was your child? And I think it reframes things in people's mind, because when it's someone else's issue, you can ignore it. When it's your issue, you can sort of soldier on.
Yeah,
And
you
when
just
it's
have
your
to
child,
do it.
then I think that's when the penny drops for people.
So it's a whole different ball game when it involves
Correct.
your child.
That's
Yeah.
absolutely right.
So that being said, um that was like your first experience. So coming here, did it end then when you found out how the domestic violence, that you were under the term of domestic violence? Did it change things when you were over here?
I think that it definitely helped me. I had the courage to leave. I knew that I was able to sustain myself financially. I had a job. I knew that I'd have people that I could rely on. So it was definitely easier from that perspective.
Okay. And when you managed to, was it tough getting out of that first experience? Did you have a difficult time getting yourself out of the domestic violence situation?
Nirmala, I love that question, because a lot of people talk about leaving, and I really want to reframe that for everyone. Is at times it's not safe, and to really reframe it as escaping. Some people need an escape plan. So in the year that I moved, I remember, and at the time I wasn't on Google, I was using that page called Where Is, and I was sitting there literally Googling the suburb, because I thought that I'd be requiring police at my door to escape. So I already
you
had
were
that
doing
mindset.
your escape plan.
That's exactly right. Interestingly, though, how it happened was really weird, because it happened at a point where I think each of us were just getting into each other's faces, and I think would hit a point of no return. And the next day I packed my clothes and I left, and I couldn't even believe it. So it was easier than I thought, with no immediate repercussions or no need for any emergency services
So there
type
was
of
no
things.
violence at that point. He
There
didn't
was
try to
no,
stop you or anything.
no. So
Okay.
that, in hindsight, I
Yeah,
think that was very lucky.
yeah. Because for
Yeah.
some people, I think it's a bit difficult because when they want to leave, the
That's
perpetrator
when
will try to stop them
that's
and
when
there'll
it
be
becomes the most
violence.
dangerous.
Yeah.
That's right.
So after you managed to get out of that first relationship, which was very, violent and abusive, how long before you moved on? And because you had a second experience as well with
Exactly.
domestic violence.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that at that point, in my head, I thought to myself, well, that was a big mistake. And I almost wanted to reclaim my life. And I said, no, let's scrap that. Let's start again. So the second person was someone who I was familiar with. And I thought, oh,
Oh,
you
someone
know,
you knew then?
it was someone that I
Okay.
knew.
Mhm.
So he's also from the same cultural background.
Mhm.
And I felt, it was him all along. Who was I fooling myself? So I think that I started to, to create those stories in my head, thinking, oh, look, that's the one, right? And, for that first year, I was living a dream, an absolute dream.
So with that second relationship, there was no early warning signs then. Like it was very different because from what I understand, what you shared with me earlier, it's very different from your first relationship.
Totally different.
Yeah.
Totally different. So then that was complete love bombing. You mentioned that before. I completely fell for it because I've never experienced it before. And this one was that was a different ball game altogether. So this was more the manipulative type of abuse, the coercion, the chronic lying. It was a sophisticated abuser. The level of detail that this person went in, to be able to create those different lives was mind-blowing. This is out of a movie. So I had no idea. I was just living that perfect scripted life, just being so grateful to life that I have finally sort of made it and found this relationship that I was meant for.
So how
And
long was those lies and manipulation going on? Because you said you didn't know about it.
it started even before the marriage. I
Oh,
think
okay.
he had it all planned. I think he had our first 5 years planned,
Oh wow.
because that was a strategy to get a visa and to settle. And this type of personality, I think, have the least regard for the person who they have targeted. So it was, in hindsight, I think about it and I still shake my head to this date, because the more I think about it, the more incredible it seems. But this is a true story. I'm not making any of that up. So then we went on with years of sort of same pattern, and I think I've developed some significant trust issues around that, and really having that feeling of not knowing the person you're sleeping next to.
So it was a lot of in and outs and, like the love bombing you said.
Correct.
Do you think because he was preying on some form of vulnerability?
I think that's what he found in me. And upon reflection, I think that I was the perfect person, because, I would have wanted that second experience to last. So in my head in the beginning, there was no question of leaving this relationship. I double the effort to make it work. So very quickly, early in into the relationship, they go into information gathering that they store into their hard drive, and then they keep it for,
For their reference on how to use it against you.
That's exactly right. So I felt that, everything I've shared before was then completely used against me, because I was thinking, this is not happening. This can't be happening again. So, but interestingly, with this person, though, there was the constant, it wasn't humiliation as such, but just the constant talking down and degrading. So it was just a subtle way of dominating. And once again, you've realised it when it's too late. So, and
especially when it's not so much of aggression involved, but it's more subtle
that's
things
correct.
and how they misuse it and lie and manipulate.
Absolutely. I always felt he was the calmest person ever, and I could,
So we wouldn't assume that, oh yeah, this is not
no,
domestic
no.
violence or anything.
Having said that, I think that a lot of people would agree that he would still come across as being socially awkward. And probably one early signs that I've started to pick up on is they would isolate you one way or the other. So very early on in that first year, he got me off social media.
Because he was, like you said, an awkward. So
that's
he
right.
got
But
you
that would
off
also
that, yeah.
allow him to have 2-3 relationships on the side, which he did.
Okay.
So that's one strategy. And the other thing was to, like I said, it's all calculated.
Did he try to weigh down on your confidence as well?
He
to
did.
boost himself up?
He
Yeah.
did. And I think that it is deeply rooted in insecurity. But interestingly, he had no friendships around him, no male friendships around him. So I think that somehow, I think that he would not get too close to other male because they would figure out his game a long time ago. So there were always statements such as, I only have girlfriends, I get on better with females. And so always laying that scene so that he's got an exit for when that would happen, and always use confusion. That's one of their tactics. So the gaslighting you mentioned and the confusion. So I spent so many years doubting myself, but that is one tactic that works very well.
So those signs went on for a few years then?
They went on for a few years, and then we had, he got caught a couple of times, and when he did, then he changed his strategy. So with someone who's a master manipulator, they're always 2 steps ahead of you, right? Until you're that person. And I think that what it is they always need to prepare for their next move.
So
That's
they're always
what I've
planning
learned.
ahead.
That's exactly
always
right.
planning what's the next manipulation.
Correct.
Their lies.
Correct. Yeah.
So throughout all that and everything that you were experiencing for a number of years, what would you say was what was the defining moment that made you change and said, I've had enough? Because as we've heard even last week, it takes a woman a couple of times where they actually leave the relationship, but they keep coming back to it.
Yes.
So what was your defining moment that says, okay, this is it, I've had enough?
Sure. And the stats say that it takes about 5 to 7 times. And I think that's one of the messages that I want people to understand, because what they know and what they notice, we know as well. But we're fighting our brains. We're literally sitting here trying to fight our brains. And I think to me, my children started voicing out their issues. They were severely neglected emotionally. It was just a warm body in the home. There was nothing, no affection, no kind words, no nothing. So they started developing strong feelings, and I was hearing that because I had some traditional expectations. I wanted the family. That's what I always wanted all my life. So when I started realizing that, well, okay, I've moved on from a few mistakes. So I only looked at them as mistakes at that point in time. And it's like, we can still survive that.
Yeah, because as a woman, I think we naturally want to maintain the family dimension of it. We don't want it to break up. And especially if kids are involved, we want to remain as a family.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that we had this big family event, and he, again, started a fight out of nowhere, packed up and leave. He left, and it took the children. It took just one of my children at 6 p.m. on that day to realize his absence. So that goes to show, and it was a very special event. So that actually goes to show how absent he was. Mm-hmm. So then I literally said to myself, well, this is it. That was the last. I'm not even staying for the children. So, and I thought they deserve better.
Okay, so that was basically the last straw, and you're like, I've had enough and just wanted to move on then.
That was it.
Okay. So going through these 2 experiences that you had, which is very different. The first one was more in aggression. The second was more into manipulation. Mm-hmm. It's been hard because you've been through it twice and the whole range of it as well. How would you say you've changed from being that young girl going through domestic violence and then a second time as well? How do you see yourself different between then and now?
I think that after the first relationship, there was just no time for reflection because I just sort of, as I said, just dismissed that completely and said, well, that was a mistake and, you know, just carried on. But I didn't realize that I too maybe repeated those same patterns. So I have a bit of a trait where I would put other people first before me, and my mind had formed that belief that unconditional love meant that they could push my boundaries. So when it happened the second time, and with the second time, I do need to add that while I left that marriage for those reasons, the abuse actually got worse when I left.
After you left, it
That's
got
right.
worse.
So then the escalation came.
So in what sense did it get worse?
Well, I think he definitely lost control over
Mhm.
me and just didn't expect that I'd be making that call and completely spiraled down. And that's, I think, at that point, that's when I accessed services. And that helped me in realizing what was happening to me, because I thought to myself, look, it's happened twice now. So how do I move on with my life? And I think I was a completely different person at the time that it happened. I had freshly arrived in the country.
Yeah.
I think that my personal growth was exponential from that point. I've learned to know myself. I've learned to become self-sufficient. And I've just realized, well, that's adding no value whatsoever. And a broken family is not about us being, not having that traditional mum, dad, and children in a home, but we were broken within the family.
Yeah. And sometimes that could be even worse
That's exactly
because of
right.
everything they're witnessing, what the kids are witnessing.
That's
Yep.
correct. So looking back, I no longer carry the shame of being a single mother and being divorced. And I do want, this is so important to me and for the people and for the women thinking about it right this minute. I do want them to know that this is a story of strength and this is a story about overcoming. And at that time, Nirmala, I can tell you, I could not bear hearing time heals, time heals. And unfortunately, it is true. And I completely had to go through the motions. However, I held on long enough and hard enough because what's awaiting at the end of that is completely worth it. When I thought at that point in time, I was like, the analogy I'll use is someone who's come out from a road accident, from a complete tragedy, and having to learn to walk again. That's how I felt. I was shaky. I just, that time was so hard, but I wasn't alone. And I knew that moving forward and being single was still going to be better than what I was experiencing within that marriage. And that was enough to keep me going, at least in the beginning.
Did you have some form of support at that time, or where were you seeking help?
I've had plenty of supports. I've been so fortunate, both within the community and what's available here. I think we live in a great country, and I've had, my tribe around me. They've always believed in me. They've been there for me every single day, and I've connected with specific domestic violence services, and I think that's what made a difference.
So you did your own research and found help, I believe. Yeah.
I did a lot of that,
Yeah.
and I went through that during COVID, so we had a lot of time and a lot of reading. I couldn't stop myself. I was on a mission because I was so determined to understand what I've been through, what the patterns are. And again, here I was completely blown away because I joined some online support groups there, and I could not read. I could not believe what I was reading. Those other women from different parts of the country and different parts of the world were describing what I have experienced.
So very similar experiences.
Very similar. but that gave me a sense of normality, because most people I speak to, their jaws drop literally.
Because they can't believe of the
Exactly.
experiences
The
that you are
extreme
going
of that.
through.
I
Yeah.
have had to censor myself so much because I'm mindful of not putting the burden on other people.
Mm-hmm.
So
But when you actually
reaching
reached out,
out,
you realize that
exactly.
there's a whole world of, I mean, unfortunately, so many others are going through the same thing.
That's exactly right.
Mm.
And that's when you see the cycle, because the cycle does not end. And this is part of that grief, is to come to accept that the cycle does not end.
Mhm.
If that, in the beginning of a relationship, the cycle is going to be very slow. It could take years before an escalation. It could take months. But as you go, that cycle becomes shorter, and it's going to start becoming weeks until the next escalation and days until the next escalation. So when you look at the impact of that on your brain and on your body, like, you will always be hypervigilant. My amygdala has worked overtime for 2 years, so now I'm sleeping well. And you will literally develop, I have developed conditions, within my body, and it literally starts making you sick.
Do you still get that feeling until now?
Because the things have been ongoing, and I have to add that the abuse from the former,
From the
from the first
relationship
relationship has continued
until today?
until today.
Wow.
So it never ends. I thought maturity and a few grey hairs would help. It doesn't. So I think it's structural.
Mhm.
So, and I've seen it now perpetrate into his other relationship as well. But I think that not being exposed to that level of toxicity on a daily basis, because these are chemicals going into your body, right? I spent countless dollars treating, my skin and everything. And, these things, I could literally, it's like radiation. Like, I could literally feel how I was getting back on my feet and finding myself again. Initially, I was always thinking, oh, I'm just becoming this new person and I'm so proud of me. I'm just recreating. And this lady was absolutely gorgeous. And she said, actually, you're going back to yourself.
So
It
it's
was
basically
so
finding
powerful.
yourself back
Exactly.
again.
Yeah.
So even though you are, as you mentioned, sort of still are going through some form of abuse, but at the same time, you are finding your true self again.
Yeah. So the abuse continues. I just don't put up with it anymore.
Mm.
And they hate
So
it.
you've learned to
They
shut it off.
absolutely hate it. I do. When I've had to raise my voice, I have. But I think that I've done a really good job keeping my dignity along the way, because I want to be a model for, an inspiration and a role model for my children. So the abuse continues on their end. I do not wear it anymore. I do not tolerate it anymore.
I think would have taken a lot of, I mean, it does take a lot of strength from you to basically just shut it off and move on with your life.
It does, because a part of that is, again, abuse touches you so deeply. There are areas of your brain that have created a false image, fear, and these are the things that you need to be able to move away from. So that does take a lot of courage, and it does take some help as well. I do not think that isolating myself would have been helpful. So I've been very privileged and very blessed, I suppose, to have had access to that level of support.
So you shared with me something before the show about your party. Maybe you would like to tell the viewers a little bit about it, because I think that's
Absolutely.
a pretty amazing thing of what you did.
Well, I had a divorce party, and
Divorce party. I don't think that's something common that many people would hear. Maybe you need to explain more what a divorce party is.
so on the day that I went to court, I shared it with my nearest and dearest, because I wanted to give closure to my friends. And I always say to them, if I will cry with you, I'll also laugh with you. And it was a big thank you. So I purchased a tiara for myself. That's right here.
Let's show them. Yeah.
And
The tiara.
it was a very special moment. And I've written vows to myself, because I wanted it to be a reminder that I matter I count. And it's the analogy of the plane. I need that oxygen mask on myself before I put it on my children.
Yes, exactly.
And so it started off like that, and I just made an absolute statement. I was wearing, bright, sparkly colors.
You're the queen of the night.
I absolutely was.
Yeah.
I'll take that. So it started like that, and then we were setting up the table, and that caught a bit of attention. And the ladies at that venue were coming up to me and saying, "Are you all divorcees?" And I said to her, "No, we aren't. They're just my tribe, and they're supporting me." And they're like, "Oh, that's so great." Throughout the night now, we've had dinner and everything, and then we stood up, and I really wanted to make a bit of a ceremonial, moment to put my tiara on, and the ladies were there, and I just remember their faces, and it was the most heartwarming moment. Some people couldn't make it, but they were still with me in spirit. And so I did that, and then I went around to say thank you and give them a hug. And before I knew it, that whole venue was clapping for me. And I just literally did a bit of a pageant walk through, because I had, my
the sash and everything.
I did.
So you had the crown and the sash.
That's right. So I literally got crowned, and everyone was just go. And I was like, do they even know what that's about?
So you even got support from the others.
I did.
Apart from your friends. Yeah.
So interestingly, one of my ladies was dressed in black, and someone went straight to her to say, "Well, I'm so sorry it's happened to her," because he felt like it was, she was grieving because she was in black, and she was like, "No, the divorce is right there,
the one,
the one in gold."
Yeah.
And then he came up to me and said, "Well, obviously you're not leaving something that's bad." And I said, "Exactly, there, you got it." So it is about that message that it was a choice, and it was about stopping something that is not right. It is about stopping the violence. So this other lady came up to me later, and she said, "I just have to thank you, because I took my girlfriend out for dinner and she was really down, but just witnessing this tonight, how empowering it is to have women supporting other women. And what you did was just incredible." And I was just getting goosebumps. So I'm getting it now. And we hugged. So it was random women hugging each other, and everyone was just in the moment. And more importantly, there were some girls going up and down the stairs, and then they came up and said, "Can we please take a photo?" And I was like, "Well, okay, all right." And they're like, "This is so important what you're doing right now. You're changing society, because this is speaking to that next generation." And I think we need to do more of this. Violence likes to be anonymous. It likes that no one is talking about it. And that's what I want to stop. I want to stop that. I want to start the conversation about violence. And this is what I want to normalize. I want to normalize the conversation about violence, acknowledge the strength that it will take someone to leave and be safe about leaving. And like you said earlier, is to address those misconceptions around violence and survivors of domestic violence.
So basically, people have to talk about it, not to keep it hidden.
Exactly.
Not to
talk it out.
Yeah.
Get it out of the system.
Get it out
completely.
And that's a process of healing as well.
I think that speaking to other ladies that are going through this is helping my own healing. And the bond that two women can make over that shared experience, because sometimes I'm very fortunate with my family, but at times you do not want to burden them.
Yes.
But another person who's experienced what you have, this is gold, because they understand you, they get you, they believe you, and it is also helping them for their healing. So this is who I want to be for those women who do not have hope today, who do not know that there is a life after abuse. I'm living proof.
Oh, yes, you definitely are. I mean, you're so courageous. You're so strong.
You.
And I mean, just from your divorce party and everything that you've said, we can see what a strong person you are. So I would just want to say, what do you think the future holds for you?
Amazing things. Only amazing things. I will not settle for anything less than meaningful in my life. And more importantly, I want to send that strong message to my children as well, around what to look for in a partner, in a woman. And it's about respect. To me, respect is not is not based on gender. It goes both ways. So, um, I want to do plenty of things for myself. I'm very inspired. I think that I've definitely found my purpose and my passion. So I get very lit up easily when I do talk about this, and I shall not be silenced.
Oh, I mean, that's awesome. And I think that's what everyone should do. Speak up, speak out. And the other thing is about believing one another. When somebody does
That's
actually speak up,
exactly
we
right.
do have to believe them.
That's right.
So I would just, to sum it up, based on your experiences and everything, what would your advice be to someone who's actually going through it now? Because you've done it all. You've gone through the first experience, the second experience, which was both completely different. You've had your divorce party. You're in such a good place now, such a strong character. What would your advice be to someone who's going through a hard time now? How can they reach your point?
First, I want to tell them I see you, I am you, and you can be me too. I just want to say to them that I think, we all have one life.
Yes.
Okay, we all have one life. This
To
is
make the
it.
best use of it.
And someone else can't live your life for you. I think that my story has happened for me and not to me. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing today. But what I want to tell them is to realize the extent of the situation in which they are and that it is not their fault. I think that's a very important message for them to know, that it is not their fault, but that they can stand up, look at violence in the eye and say, it stops with me.
Yes, because just to latch on to what you said, because unfortunately, a lot of people in that situation actually think it is their fault.
Yes.
And that's where they have to step out of it and understand that it's not their fault, because whatever the perpetrator is doing, that's on
right.
him.
It's a part of the projection, and I've believed that for a long time, but no more. When you know the patterns, and so I'll really encourage them to reach out to those support groups, because they're going to read stories that will be like theirs, because the patterns are the same. At every corner of the world, the patterns are the same. So if you want to be ahead of the game, knowledge is power. That is my biggest piece of advice. And reach out. We have an amazing support system here in Australia, and I think that we'll be able to put some links down in the chats later. So don't isolate yourself. The stats are showing that only 1 in 10 women will reach out for help. So we have 9 out of 10 women out there who are confused, who are belittled every day, who are abused every day.
And they continue to be suffering in silence. And everybody has to play a part to change those numbers. I mean,
That's right.
Only 1 in 10 come out. We need to really, really change those numbers.
We do. And how do we do that? It starts with us, because it affects everyone. If it doesn't affect you, it'll affect someone that you know. And look at COVID. We talk about COVID every day, and it's been around for 2 years. What about violence? It is there, and it's a plague.
So there definitely needs to be more conversation about it, and we need to make changes for it.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It's been such an amazing, courageous story that you're sharing with everyone, and we hope that this sharing will definitely move those who feel stuck in dire situations where they feel that there is no hope. We hope that this story gives them some hope, and that they know that there's indeed help and support out there, and that definitely there's life after abuse, for sure. So thank you once again for sharing your wonderful story with us. I mean, all the hardships, but the amazing part is how strong you've come out of it. And that's amazing. And that's what we hope the viewers take away from this. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's my honor. Thank you.
So as we know, family and domestic violence is not just about family. It is also a social concern that everyone should take note of. No one should close a blind eye to it. When you notice signs of abuse, don't turn a deaf ear. You need to listen out for it. When you hear cries of anguish, do something about it. Don't pretend. Don't ignore the problem. Because when you see signs, you have to take action and reach out and help those who actually need it. Some people might be too afraid to step out and seek help. And that's where we need to play our part. If we notice it, we need to reach out to them and help them. Gently let them know that you are available and ready to support them and believe in them when they share their stories with you. Because this is something that's so serious. People generally won't make up stories about being abused. So we need to believe in them. And if you don't know how to help them, there's a lot of support out there. So direct them towards support centers because definitely violence can be stopped and it is preventable. We just all have to play our parts. So get informed with the key facts to the problem. And if you or anyone you know are facing a domestic violence situation, please do reach out to someone and seek help. There are crisis helplines available. So, yeah, if you need more information, please do seek those crisis hotlines. If possible, we can share them with you. And if you also need more information at any time, please do email us at perspectives@rmplive.com.au. Thank you for all your comments. This definitely has been such an encouraging show, and thank you to our guest for being so courageous and sharing her story with us. Next Thursday, we will end our three-part series on family and domestic violence, and this time we will be discussing with you on healthy relationships. How do you actually build a healthy relationships and avoid those other, paths which lead you to abuse? So definitely tune in next Thursday at 8 p.m. and join in our discussion here on Perspectives. Have a good night and have a great weekend ahead. And remember, look for something positive each and every day, even if some days you have to look a little bit harder and a little bit further. So stay positive always. Good night and see you next week.